The Forgotten Council, a coalition of ancient civilizations that had ruled the galaxy for eons, convened in their magnificent cosmic citadel. The structure was a testament to their dominance, a crystalline wonder that floated above a swirling nebula, its towering spires shimmering with energy streams that pulsed like the veins of a living entity. Each species in the council prided itself on its long-standing legacy, with their advancements etched into the very walls of this celestial stronghold. Today, the chamber buzzed with anticipation as representatives from across the galaxy gathered to discuss a matter of great significance. At the heart of the citadel was the Assembly Hall, a vast dome where holographic projections of stars and galaxies spun slowly, a reminder of the dominion these species held over the cosmos. Delegates took their places, their appearances as varied as the galaxies they hailed from. The Omoliths, known for their crystalline exoskeletons and sharp intellect, sat at the center, their leader High Counselor Threx presiding over the session. Surrounding them were other species, the ethereal Auralites, whose shimmering forms radiated empathy, the towering Braconians, known for their brute strength, and the shadowy Zexor, whose forms flickered like shadows in light. The agenda was clear. The Exirelians, a newly discovered species, had become a growing concern. Reports indicated that they had rapidly evolved, establishing colonies at the edge of council-controlled sectors. Their population had exploded, and they were demanding equitable treatment, a notion that many in the council found both audacious and laughable. Threx rose, his crystalline form catching the light and refracting it into a dazzling array of colors. His voice, cold and commanding, echoed through the chamber. "Fellow counselors, we gather here to address a threat to the stability of our galaxy. The Exirelians, though newly emerged, have shown themselves to be a disruptive force. Their demands for resource sharing and representation in this esteemed council are not only premature but dangerous. They are a destabilizing element that must be dealt with swiftly." A murmur of agreement swept through the chamber, punctuated by derisive laughter. A representative from the Zixor leaned forward, their flickering form distorting as they spoke. "It is amusing, is it not, that such a primitive species believes it can negotiate with us? Their technology is rudimentary at best, their understanding of galactic politics non-existent. They are but children playing at being rulers." Threx allowed a faint smirk to cross his face. "Indeed, their audacity knows no bounds. They speak of equality as though they have earned a place among us. But let us not be hasty in dismissing them entirely. Their rapid expansion and adaptability are unusual. We must ensure that this upstart species is contained before their influence spreads further." As the debate unfolded, a holographic projection materialized in the center of the chamber, displaying a message intercepted from the Exirelians. The words hung in the air, stark and simple: "Do not force us into action. We value harmony, but we will act decisively if provoked." For a moment, silence fell over the assembly. Then, as if on cue, laughter erupted from the delegates. The Braconian representative, his deep voice booming, bellowed, "Act decisively. These creatures barely understand the technology they wield. What could they possibly do to us?" Threx raised a hand, silencing the chamber. "Their message is little more than a bluff, a desperate attempt to mask their weakness. They do not understand the forces they are dealing with. It is our duty to remind them of their place in the natural order." Not all in the chamber shared this sentiment. Lyra, the Auralite representative, floated forward, her translucent form glowing softly. Her voice was gentle yet firm, a stark contrast to the cold pragmatism of Threx. "I urge caution," she said, addressing the assembly. "The Cyrelians are not to be underestimated. Their history, though brief, is one of remarkable adaptability and resilience. They have survived challenges that would have destroyed lesser species. To provoke them could yield consequences we cannot foresee." Her words were met with skepticism. A representative from the Herilians, a species of amphibious beings, scoffed. "Adaptability is meaningless in the face of superior technology and strategy. We are the pinnacle of evolution. Let them adapt all they want, it will not save them from what is coming." Despite Lyra's warnings, the majority of the council was swayed by Threx's arguments. A vote was called, and the results were overwhelming. Sanctions were approved, targeting the Exirelians' trade networks and resource supply lines. Embargoes would isolate their colonies, while military blockades would ensure compliance. It was a calculated strategy, designed to crush the Exirelians without direct conflict. Threx's satisfaction was evident as he announced the results. The vote is clear. The Exirelians will be contained. Let this serve as a lesson to any who dare challenge the authority of this council. Lyra, though disheartened, made one final plea. I implore you all to reconsider. This path we tread is one of arrogance and short-sightedness. The Exirelians have shown restraint even in the face of our provocations. Perhaps we should seek dialogue instead of domination. Her words fell on deaf ears. The assembly was adjourned, and the delegates dispersed, confident in their decision. In their hubris, the council believed they had secured their dominance once again. Yet, as they celebrated their perceived victory, they failed to recognize the storm brewing on the horizon. Far from the citadel, in the shadowed regions of space, the Exirelians were watching. They had heard the council's decree, felt the tightening grip of sanctions and blockades, but they did not despair. Instead, they began to prepare. Their message of peace had been ignored, their warnings dismissed. Now they would show the galaxy what harmony tempered with resilience could achieve. For the Forgotten Council, this was the beginning of a conflict they could not fathom, a reckoning they would never forget. The Council's sanctions began to take their toll almost immediately. Xyrelian colonies, once thriving hubs of activity, reported severe shortages within weeks. Critical resources, including food, energy supplies, and medical materials, were withheld, cutting off lifelines that many of the settlements relied upon. Diplomatic channels were coldly ignored, leaving Xyrelian envoys stranded in bureaucratic limbo. Council fleets, under the guise of routine patrols, entered Xyrelian space, their intimidating presence a constant reminder of the looming threat. To the Council, this was a calculated exercise in dominance. To the Xyrelians, it was a silent declaration of war. The breaking point came when a Xyrelian convoy, tasked with delivering essential supplies to a remote colony, was intercepted by Council forces. Accused of smuggling contraband, the convoy was attacked without warning. Thousands of Xyrelians perished in the assault, and the shattered remains of their vessels were left adrift in space. What the Council had not anticipated was that the entire incident had been recorded. The footage, smuggled out by a surviving Xyrelian scout, spread like wildfire across neutral territories. It showed unarmed cargo ships obliterated by heavily armed Council destroyers, their pleas for mercy ignored. The galaxy watched in horror as the so-called protectors of order revealed their true face. Outrage swept through Xyrelian colonies. Though the Council expected panic, what they failed to predict was the resilience of the Xyrelian people. Instead of despair, they responded with determination. Reports from Council spies painted a disturbing picture of rapid adaptation. Entire cities were restructured overnight, their infrastructure optimized to conserve energy and produce essential resources locally. Barter systems replaced traditional trade networks, bypassing the sanctions entirely. What little external trade remained was conducted through clandestine routes that the Council struggled to intercept. Even more alarming were the whispers of scientific breakthroughs. Xyrelian scientists, forced by necessity, had begun developing advanced energy reactors, efficient weapons systems, and experimental deep space stations. These were not the hallmarks of a species beaten into submission, but rather of one preparing for something far greater. The Council dismissed these reports as exaggerations, unwilling to admit that their plan might be backfiring. Diplomatic silence from the Xyrelians only deepened the unease. Where once there had been desperate appeals for negotiation, now there was nothing but eerie calm. Messages sent to the Council were reduced to a single recurring phrase: "We value peace. Do not make us act." It was a statement as enigmatic as it was unsettling. To Threx, it was the last gasp of a desperate race clinging to its ideals. To others, particularly the Auralites, it was a warning that the Council was dangerously close to crossing an invisible line. Tensions reached a boiling point when a fleet of Council ships was dispatched to enforce compliance on one of the Exarelians' outer colonies. The mission was simple: dismantle the colony's infrastructure to prevent further development. When the fleet arrived, they found the planet eerily devoid of life. Its sprawling cities were dark, and no signs of activity could be detected. Orbiting the planet, however, was a grid of energy fields unlike anything the Council had encountered before. Assuming it to be a bluff, the fleet commander ordered an assault. The ships moved into formation and fired upon the energy grid, expecting it to collapse under the barrage. Instead, their weapons were absorbed harmlessly by the fields. Moments later, the grid retaliated not with violence but with precision. One by one, the Council's ships were rendered inoperable, their systems shutting down as though an unseen hand had simply turned them off. The fleet, now adrift and defenseless, was left to contemplate their failure. As the fleet drifted helplessly in orbit, a message was broadcast from the planet below. It was the voice of the Exarelians, calm and resolute. "This is our last act of restraint. We value peace, but we will not allow aggression to go unanswered. Leave now and no harm will come to you. Remain and you will see what we are truly capable of." The incident sent shockwaves through the Council. For the first time, the delegates began to question the narrative they had so eagerly embraced. How had a supposedly primitive species constructed a defense system capable of neutralizing an entire fleet without a single shot fired? Whispers of dissent grew louder, particularly among the Auralites, who saw this as proof of the Exarelians' capacity for restraint. They could have destroyed the fleet, Lyra argued during an emergency session. But they chose not to. They are giving us every opportunity to change course. Why can we not see that? Threx, however, refused to back down. To him, the Exarelians' display was nothing more than an elaborate bluff designed to mask their inherent weakness. They rely on trickery because they lack the strength to confront us directly, he insisted. We must double our efforts. Their resistance only proves that they pose a greater threat than we realized. The Council was divided, but the majority still sided with Threx. Plans were drawn for a more aggressive campaign to dismantle Exarelian resistance. Yet beneath the surface, unease was growing. Reports of Exarelian advancements continued to trickle in, each more alarming than the last. Their scientists were not merely adapting to the sanctions, they were thriving under them, pushing the boundaries of what was thought possible. Deep space stations capable of sustaining entire populations, weapons that operated on principles the Council barely understood, and energy reactors that outperformed even the most advanced Council technology, all of this pointed to a species that was anything but primitive. The Exarelians, for their part, remained silent. Their colonies continued to function in defiance of the sanctions, their people united by a shared determination. To the outside observer, they seemed almost unbothered by the Council's actions, as though they had prepared for this very scenario. But beneath the surface, preparations were underway for something far greater. The Exarelians knew that their warnings would not be heeded. They knew that the Council's arrogance would push them into a corner. And they knew that when the time came, they would have to show the galaxy what harmony, tempered by resilience, could achieve. The Council, blinded by its hubris, failed to see the gathering storm. To them, the Exarelians were still the naive upstarts they had dismissed at the beginning. But in their refusal to acknowledge the signs, they had unknowingly set the stage for a reckoning unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. The Exarelians' defiant show of restraint, the galaxy held its breath, waiting to see how the Council would respond. But the next move did not come from the Council, it came from the Exarelians. In an unprecedented and audacious display of their capabilities, the Exarelians launched what could only be described as a counteroffensive, though it bore none of the hallmarks of traditional warfare. Without warning, their ships emerged from quantum rifts within the heart of Council-controlled territories, bypassing every known defensive measure. These vessels, sleek and otherworldly, seemed to shimmer with an energy that defied comprehension. The Cyrelian ships moved with calculated precision, targeting key Council fleets and installations. Yet, to the astonishment of the Council forces, there were no explosions, no casualties. Instead, entire fleets were rendered inert, their systems disrupted by fields of energy that seemed to scramble every technological function. Weapons refused to fire, engines fell silent, and communications were reduced to static. The once mighty fleets of the Council floated aimlessly, their crews unharmed but helpless. It was a chilling demonstration of power, not in its destructiveness but in its restraint. Across the galaxy, vital Council outposts went dark. Cyrelian forces bypassed planetary defenses with ease, their ships descending silently before dismantling key operations. Yet again, there were no reports of violence. Entire planets were left eerily intact, their inhabitants unscathed but unable to function. The ex-Cyrelians' actions seemed almost surgical, as though their goal was not conquest but incapacitation. It was a form of warfare the Council had never encountered, a conflict fought without bloodshed but with devastating effectiveness. Amid the chaos, a small faction within the Council began to question the official narrative. Among them were the Auralites, led by Lyra, who had long argued for caution in dealing with the ex-Cyrelians. Intrigued by their mysterious tactics and advanced technology, this group delved into the archives, seeking answers about the origins of this enigmatic species. What they uncovered would shake the very foundations of the Council's understanding. The ex-Cyrelians, it seemed, were not a newly discovered species after all. Buried in the Council's oldest records was evidence of a civilization that had once flourished millennia ago, only to vanish without a trace. The Cyrelians were their descendants, a lineage that had survived by retreating into obscurity. Their apparent emergence as a primitive race was no accident. It had been a deliberate strategy to avoid drawing the attention of the Council, whose arrogance and dominance had driven countless civilizations to ruin. This revelation painted the ex-Cyrelians' actions in a new light. Their technology, which the Council had dismissed as rudimentary, was in fact far more advanced than anything in the galaxy. Where the Council relied on brute force and industrial-scale production, the ex-Cyrelians had mastered quantum mechanics and biological integration. Their ships and systems were designed not for conquest but for efficiency and adaptability, enabling them to achieve feats that the Council could scarcely comprehend. As word of these discoveries spread, cracks began to form within the Council. Some members, particularly those from less dominant species, saw the ex-Cyrelians as a potential ally rather than a threat. They admired the restraint the ex-Cyrelians had shown, even as they dismantled the Council's power. Others, however, clung to the belief that this was a direct challenge to the Council's authority and called for a decisive response. High Councilor Threx, unshaken in his resolve, convened an emergency session to address the crisis. His crystalline form glinted coldly as he spoke, his voice a mixture of anger and determination. The ex-Cyrelians have made their intentions clear. They seek to undermine everything this Council has built. We must respond with total force. If they wish to show us their power, we will show them ours. But his words did not carry the same weight they once had. The dissenting voices had grown louder, emboldened by the ex-Cyrelians' restraint and the revelations about their history. They have shown us restraint, not aggression, Lyra argued, her voice steady and resolute. They could have destroyed us, but they chose not to. Is this not a sign that they seek peace, not domination? Perhaps it is we who are in the wrong. Threx dismissed her words with a wave of his hand. Naivety has no place in this Council. Restraint is merely a tactic, a way to lull us into complacency. If we do not act now, we will lose everything. Even as Threx spoke, reports continued to pour in of ex-Cyrelian countermeasures that defied logic. Council fleets sent to reclaim lost territories found themselves incapacitated in increasingly creative ways. Weapons systems were transformed into energy generators, their destructive potential repurposed to sustain life. Entire battleships were repurposed into humanitarian vessels, their holds filled with supplies that the ex-Cyrelians distributed to the Council's own oppressed populations. These actions left the council in disarray. For every call to arms, there was a growing recognition that the Exirelians were not the aggressors the council had portrayed them to be. Their actions, though disruptive, carried a message the galaxy did not need to be ruled through fear and domination. It could thrive on principles of cooperation and mutual respect. As the council's unity crumbled, Threx found himself increasingly isolated. His calls for total war fell on deaf ears, even among his closest allies. The Exirelians, it seemed, had not only neutralized the council's fleets but also dismantled the very ideology that had sustained its dominance. The arrogance and hubris that had defined the council were now its greatest weaknesses. In the shadow of these events, the Exirelians remained silent. They did not gloat, nor did they issue demands. Their actions spoke for them, a quiet assertion of their strength and principles. For the first time in its history, the council was forced to confront the possibility that its way of governing was not only flawed but unsustainable. The Exirelians had unveiled a new path, one that challenged everything the council had stood for. As the session ended in chaos, the delegates dispersed, each left to grapple with the implications of what they had witnessed. For Threx, the realization was bitter. The council was no longer the unchallenged authority it had once been. For Lyra and others like her, there was hope, a chance to build a new order based on the values the Exirelians had demonstrated. The galaxy, it seemed, stood on the brink of a transformation, one that would be defined not by war but by the power of restraint and the courage to change. The galaxy teetered on the edge of transformation, a fragile silence blanketing the chaos the council had once called order. The Cyrelians, silent architects of change, began their final act not with the brutality of conquest but with the meticulous unraveling of oppressive structures. Strategic council systems, long fortified as symbols of dominance, were rendered powerless. Their sprawling bureaucracies, designed to extract and control, were dismantled piece by piece. Yet the planets beneath these systems were left intact, their inhabitants untouched but profoundly altered. The Cyrelians' approach was surgical and deliberate. Militarized zones, once bustling with war machines, were converted into hubs of interspecies cooperation. Planetary resources, previously hoarded by the Council's elite, were redistributed to sustain life and growth. On these transformed worlds, new cities began to rise, centers of sustainability and innovation, built to foster collaboration among the galaxy's diverse species. The message was clear: domination had no place in the Exirelian vision of the future. From their advanced ships and stations, the Shirelians broadcast an ultimatum to the galaxy. Their words carried neither malice nor triumph, but the weight of unshakable conviction: you pushed us into action. Now let us show you a better way. The statement echoed across the Council's fractured communications networks, reaching every corner of their dominion. It was not a threat but a declaration of intent, a promise to replace fear with hope. The response within the Council was fractured. Many member species, weary of the Council's oppressive policies, embraced the Exirelians' vision. Others, particularly those who had profited from the Council's power, resisted vehemently. At the center of this resistance stood High Counselor Threx, his crystalline form now a shadow of its once proud stature. Threx, unyielding to the end, devised a final gambit to reclaim the Council's dominance: the activation of a doomsday weapon, a relic of an ancient era, capable of annihilating entire star systems. Threx's plan was simple in its cruelty. He believed that by wielding such power he could force the Exirelians to retreat and reassert the Council's authority through fear. The device, buried deep within a forgotten Council stronghold, was activated in secret. Its energy began to surge, threatening to unleash destruction on an unprecedented scale. But Threx had underestimated his adversaries. Before the weapon could reach its critical point, Cyrelian forces intervened. Their mastery of quantum mechanics allowed them to neutralize the device without triggering its catastrophic potential. In a move that stunned the galaxy, the Exirelians transformed the weapon itself into a monument to peace. Where once it had been a symbol of destruction, it now stood as a beacon of hope, inscribed with a simple message. Strength is found not in domination but in creation. Threx's gambit marked the end of his reign. Stripped of his authority and humiliated before the galaxy, he was removed from power. The Omelith species, long seen as the architects of the Council's dominance, faced a reckoning of their own. Their once unshakable influence crumbled, leaving them to grapple with the consequences of their hubris. For many, it was a moment of bitter justice. For others, a stark warning of what unchecked arrogance could lead to. With Threx's downfall, the Axirelians turned their focus to rebuilding the Council. They extended a hand to cooperative species, inviting them to join in the creation of a new order. Their advanced technologies, once concealed out of necessity, were now shared selectively, empowering rather than dominating. Energy reactors capable of sustaining entire planets, medical advancements that eradicated long-standing diseases, and sustainable agricultural systems were gifted to those willing to embrace change. The Axirelians' influence brought about a transformation that many had thought impossible. Formerly hostile species found themselves thriving under their guidance. Long-standing conflicts were resolved not through force but through dialogue and understanding. The galaxy began to heal, its fractured alliances mending in the wake of the Axirelians' example. They did not impose their will but rather inspired others to follow their lead. A decade after the initial conflict, the Axirelians unveiled their most ambitious project yet, Nexus Station. Positioned at the heart of the galaxy, this immense structure was designed as a meeting point for all civilizations. Its architecture reflected the Axirelian ethos: graceful, efficient, and harmonious, blending the styles and contributions of countless species. The station's central chamber, a vast dome lined with crystalline panels, became the new seat of intergalactic diplomacy. Representatives from every corner of the galaxy gathered for the station's inaugural summit. The atmosphere was one of cautious optimism, a far cry from the tension and arrogance that had once defined the Council. The Axirelian delegation, led by their enigmatic leaders, addressed the assembly with quiet confidence. "Let Nexus Station stand as a symbol of what we can achieve together," they proclaimed. "Restraint is not weakness but strength. Let this be the foundation of a galaxy united not by fear, but by hope." The summit concluded with the unveiling of an inscription at the heart of the station. Carved into a pillar of shimmering crystal, it read, "Let this stand as a reminder of what patience can achieve and what arrogance can destroy." The words resonated deeply with those who read them, a stark reflection of the galaxy's tumultuous journey and a beacon for the path ahead. As the delegates departed, the Axirelians lingered, their gaze fixed on the stars beyond. They had not sought this role, nor had they wished for conflict. But when pushed to act, they had done so with purpose and restraint, reshaping the galaxy without succumbing to the cycles of destruction that had plagued it for centuries. The legacy they left behind was not one of conquest, but of quiet revolution, a testament to the power of resilience, patience, and the courage to forge a new way forward.